Our Old Testament reading is from Isaiah. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lofty, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. Seraphs were in attendance above him. Each had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces, and with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And one called to another and said, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." The pivots on the threshold shook at the voices of those who called, and the house filled with smoke. And I said, "Woe is me! I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. Yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." Then one of the seraphs flew to me, holding a live coal that had been taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. The seraph touched my mouth with it and said, "Now that this has touched your lips, your guilt has departed, and your sin is blotted out." Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" And I said, "Here am I, send me." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
I once heard, and maybe you've heard it too, that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. If someone were to ask you to define the word heart, would you be able to do it? On Valentine's Day, the heart is associated with romance. Having a good heart is about compassion and integrity. In June Hershey's great song, "Deep in the Heart of Texas," it's about depth and location. In hospitals, it's about cardiology. When we know something by heart, it's about memory. And in Braveheart, it's about fortitude and freedom. I always wanted to do that. Heart apparently means a lot of things. So when we say that words flow from the abundance of the heart, what on earth do we mean when we use that word, heart? Well, the prophet Isaiah had a few things to say about that. "I am a man of unclean lips," he says, "and I live among a people of unclean lips." By confessing the truth about this people's unclean lips, Isaiah indirectly confesses the truth about their unclean hearts. For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Today's passage, which is commonly known as the Commission of Isaiah, is situated in the context of God's judgment of Judah. The elite class has trampled the poor, murder plagues the land, kings take bribes and don't protect the orphans, and the widow's plight never receives a hearing. So the gavel drops, and God announces judgment. "I will turn my hand against you," God says. "I will smelt away your dross and remove all your alloy." These are dark days for Israel, and it's to these people that Isaiah will be sent. "Here am I, Lord, send me." But make no mistake about it, when Isaiah enters the throne room of God, he himself is far from ready. He too is a man of unclean lips and an unclean heart. "Woe is me," he cries, "I am lost." Or as another better translation puts it, "I am undone." So what is the heart? And how can its corruption lead to our undoing? Well, we might be surprised to find that the heart actually has a lot to do with the gut. Earlier this year, 2 surgeons in China announced their plans to take the head of a living person with a degenerative disease and transplant it onto a cadaver. Now I've got your attention. This sermon just took a weird turn, y'all. As you might imagine, the announcement sparked an intense debate within the medical community, including doctors and medical ethicists. The conversation revolved around the question of whether our identities are stored in the brain. Am I merely my brain? Do we reside in our brains such that our identities can simply be transplanted from one set of shoulders onto another? And if so, does this mean someone is less human if they have lower brain function? You've probably heard the phrase, "I think, therefore I am." But is that true? As neuroscientists and philosophers are now demonstrating, human consciousness does not simply and merely reside in the brain. Rather, it's a function of our entire bodies. Some children who are born with severely damaged cerebral hemispheres can still laugh and cry and understand the difference between family members and strangers, and they can even show preference for certain kinds of music. Other studies have shown that recipients of various organs that are not the brain sometimes display similar behavior and personality traits as that of their donors, including similar tastes in music, food, and career preferences. Trippy stuff, right? But it demonstrates that memory and consciousness are, to a very large degree, stored in our bodies, not just our brains. And here's the thing. These habits of the body are essentially habits of the heart. They're formed through repetitive practices that shape our desires. Consider the reason for coming to church on Sundays. Most of us didn't start coming to church because we already loved the Lord deeply. We came because we loved the Lord a little. But then we started standing, singing, sitting, standing again, reading, listening, eating bread and drinking wine, and passing signs of God's peace to one another. And we did it again and again and again. And through these practices, our bodies, our whole selves, got in the habit of loving God more and more. That's how desire works. Advertisement companies understand this quite well, by the way. We don't long for something by simply hearing a lecture about it, or even a sermon for that matter. We long for something by immersing our whole bodies in the reality of the thing. This is why one popular Christian author likes to translate the Greek word cardia, from which we get the words cardiac or cardiologist, as gut. The heart is basically the gut, that visceral sense of longing for something or someone. You don't get that from the brain alone. So here we have Isaiah, who enters the throne room of God representing a people of unclean lips and unclean hearts, unclean guts, unclean desires. The desires are unclean because they formed bad habits. We know this because when Isaiah says, "Here am I, send me," God sends him to tell the people, be ever listening, but never comprehending. Be ever seeing, but never understanding. Sort of a weird evangelism strategy, but okay. The point is that it's not enough for this people to simply know the problem, to see it, or to hear it. Heck, there are plenty of progressive Christians who are ever seeing, ever hearing, and ever tweeting about all the injustices that plague this land. But it's not enough to simply know the truth. We must love the truth. We must desire it from our hearts, our guts. That's what it means to truly comprehend and understand. And it takes practice. To do justice, we must love justice. And to love justice, we we must practice justice. Justice, after all, is a habit of the heart. Bishop Desmond Tutu, who worked tirelessly to end institutional segregation in South Africa, served as chairperson of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which aimed to restore the social fabric that had been torn apart by racism and violence. Tutu's work was done in the spirit of what he calls Ubuntu, which is simply the notion that a person is a person through other persons. The idea is that you are yourself precisely to the extent that you are more than yourself. The word Ubuntu is sometimes translated as I am because we are, or to turn the other popular phrase on its head, we are, therefore I am. It's about desire for another. And the formation of desire requires practice and immersion into the life of the other. The more we desire those who are different from us, the more human we become. The less we desire those who are different from us, the less human we become. When we desire the well-being and flourishing of another, we flourish. But when we desire the destruction of another, we bring destruction on ourselves. It undoes us. Woe is me. I am undone. Have you ever heard the idiom, from your lips to God's ear? The meaning of this saying is to express a desire so strong that you would like God to grant it. If someone were to say, well, I hope Duke basketball wins the national title next year, you might hear me say, from your lips to God's ear. But truly, what would it mean to stand in God's presence with our desires laid bare? If I do not desire the immigrant who flees violence, if I do not desire the child who is not my own, if I do not desire those who speak different languages, if I do not practice Ubuntu, how can I expect to stand before the God whose holiness is defined by the desire that the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit have for each other? My unclean lips to those unholy ears? Lord, have mercy. I am undone. Today, the church celebrates Trinity Sunday. The Trinity tends to make us a little bit nervous because we often treat it like an intellectual puzzle or a mathematical conundrum. How can God be both three and one, we ask? But friends, God's life as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is not about solving a riddle. Yes, the Trinity is a mystery, but in the New Testament, the word for mystery actually means something like open secret. It's like a secret we've been let in on. It's open to us because it's been revealed in the person of Jesus Christ, who, as the Apostle Paul tells us in today's epistle reading, is the one who offers worship to God first, crying, Abba, Father. He is the pioneer of our faith and our desire. It's His desire, His worship, His lips to God's ear that gets planted in us. That's the doorway into the triune life. It's Jesus Christ Himself. And what we have to ask ourselves is whether we can go through that door alone, by ourselves. A couple weeks ago, a video surfaced of a man in New York City spewing hateful comments at restaurant workers for speaking Spanish. Perhaps you've seen it. It's viral now. Nobody should be speaking Spanish in this business establishment, he claimed, because, and I quote, "This is America." He questioned their immigration status and threatened to call immigration customs enforcement, automatically assuming that anyone who looked differently or spoke differently did not deserve to inhabit the same space or breathe the same air as him. This kind of public rhetoric has become fairly mainstream of late, in case you haven't noticed. It was later discovered that this man is a lawyer at a firm in Manhattan, and his profile on the firm's website reveals a most intriguing detail, namely that he's fluent in Spanish. What should we make of the fact that a white nationalist spent so much time and energy learning the language of a people he does not love? As Willie Jennings, the author of a commentary on the book of Acts, says, some people learn a language out of gut-wrenching determination born of necessity. They grit their teeth, put their head down, and plow through it so they can leverage the language for their own use. The ability to communicate with Spanish-speaking clients is surely one way to increase profits. It's the acquisition of a foreign language in order to exploit a foreign people. But to learn a language faithfully, Jennings continues, requires love. The rest of his quote deserves to be read at length. Most people who enter a lifetime of fluency, he says, do so because at some point in time they learn to love it. They fall in love with the sounds, and the language sounds beautiful to them. And if that love is complete, they fall in love with the people, the food, the faces, the plans, the practices, the songs, the poetry, the happiness, the sadness, the ambiguity, the truth. And they love the place, the circled earth those people call their land, their landscapes, their home. To speak a language is to speak a people. God speaks people fluently, and God, with all the urgency that is with the Holy Spirit, wants the disciples of His only begotten Son to speak people fluently too. Wow. That's the Pentecost miracle we talked about last week. Different languages, one love. That's immersion. That's practice. That's desire. You see, that racist lawyer was ever seeing, ever hearing, even ever speaking, for he knew the language. Yet he was never comprehending, never understanding. Because if he truly knew the language, he would know it from his gut, from the depth of desire for a people that resides in his body, not just his brain. But long before any of this was Pentecostal, it was Trinitarian. Yes, God speaks human, but God speaks human because God speaks God. Just as the Spirit created fluency among people at Pentecost, the Spirit makes the Father fluent in the Son and the Son fluent in the Father. That's the basis for the Pentecostal nature of the church. And it means that you cannot love God by yourself. You love God with others because you are a person through other people. I am because we are. You are because we are. Ubuntu, remember? Unless we cry out for our brothers and sisters, we cannot faithfully cry out for our Abba Father. Love of God and love of neighbor are inextricably bound. Why? Because God is triune. So let's practice Trinitarian faith, brothers and sisters. Let's get it deep into our bodies and our guts. It won't be born of our desire, for we are people of unclean lips and unclean hearts. But thanks be to God. The Spirit is like a burning coal pressed upon our lips, infusing our hearts with the desire of Jesus. And out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks.